Hello. This lecture is about the bureaucracy. I included bureaucracy in a section or a unit of this course called Modern Inventions because the development of the bureaucracy, and most particularly the expansion of the bureaucracy, marks a rather dramatic shift in our understanding of government. When the Founding Fathers wrote the Constitution, they very much were looking at government as a sort of very bare minimalist sort of entity that would protect people and protect their property and so on, but not do much more. With the expansion of the bureaucracy, we are looking more and more at a government that's not just about law making and law enforcing, but also about providing services. And the bureaucracy does a bit of both. It both enforces the laws and it provides services. Bureaucracy is usually categorized under sort of the branch of government, the executive branch of the government. It is the portion of government that is charged with executing the laws that Congress passes. It is also, interestingly enough, the chief source of complaints about the government. Why? Well, for a couple of reasons. First, because most of the contact we have with the U.S. government on any basis whatsoever is with bureaucracies. If you think about the times that you've had to deal with the U.S. government, and for many of you I suspect you probably haven't thought about times you've had to deal with the U.S. government, but think about times that you have dealt with the U.S. government. Think about things like filing your federal income taxes, or for that matter, filing student loan applications. Think about if you've ever had to get a passport, or if you've ever had to deal with the post office to send a piece of mail. Some of you may have had businesses or other things that required you to deal with the federal government. What you dealt with in each of these instances was a bureaucracy, and the arm of the government that deals with enforcing the laws around things like income tax collection or foreign travel. But it's also the area of the government that sort of extends the services like sending mail or writing passports. In addition to that, the other reason why the bureaucracy gets most of the complaints of government is that bureaucracies thrive on efficiency, and they are in fact far more efficient than other ways of doing things. But they become efficient because they have three key elements. These three key elements that all bureaucracies have are formalized rules, job specialization, and hierarchical authority. Talk a little bit more about what those mean in a second, but these three very specific elements of a bureaucracy are also the things that make bureaucracy very hard to deal with. Let's talk a little bit about what these three things are. Formalized rules mean that every bureaucracy has a very rigid understanding of how things should be done. A number of years ago, long number of years ago, Al Gore, when he ran for the presidency, or was it the vice presidency, went on the talk shows like Jay Leno, talking about the level of rules and bureaucracy involved in government purchasing. And he said that there were, for example, 12 pages of rules to discuss what an ashtray on the U.S. On the presidential jets should look like. They had to be made of a certain kind of glass. That glass had to be a certain thickness. The ashtray had to be a certain size. It could not be bigger than this or smaller than this. It had to be. These are the type of rules that exist in a bureaucracy. Think about if you've had to, well, everybody's, I think, favorite bureaucracy right now is the Transportation Security Agency, the people who do the screenings if you get on an airplane. There are a whole series of rules that sort of talk about what can be screened and what should not be screened. The I think everyone's least favorite among them are the rules about taking liquids onto an airplane. Well, these are a series of very formalized rules. If I'm going to go on an airplane, I am allowed to bring liquids, but my liquids must all be in containers of no more than 3 ounces. And all of these containers have to fit into a single Ziploc bag, and that single Ziploc bag cannot be more than one quart in size. These are a series of formalized rules. I can't bring any ordinary sandwich bag. I can't use and I've tried this once or twice, if I have a 6-ounce tube of toothpaste that's more than half gone, I might figure, okay, well, that's less than 3 ounces of toothpaste, but the container is more than 6 ounces. I can't carry that tube of toothpaste onto the airline. These are the formalized rules. These are the things that annoy people about bureaucracies, because these rules are the same for everybody. The second element of what makes a bureaucracy is job specialization. Let's go back to the example of the Transportation Security Agency. If you've ever seen the people who work there, each person has a very specific role. There's a person whose job it is to check IDs. There's another person whose job it is to run the X-ray machine. There's another person who supervises the running of 2 or 3 X-ray machines, and that's the person who gets called in if there's a question or something is unclear. There are then separate supervisors who sit very far apart from all of this, who monitor the jobs that the different screeners are doing. Part of what job specialization means is that the person whose job it is to supervise the X-ray screenings can't go in a pinch to check IDs. That's not that person's job. In order to become the person who supervises the X-ray screenings, you have to have passed certain qualifications, and those qualifications are very limited. This all sounds very silly until you start realizing that the Transportation Security Agency also does things like monitor trucks that are going across the border and Canada and Mexico. The jobs that you need to do in order to be able to seal a truck and make sure that there's nothing suspicious on that is very different from the skills that you need to monitor an X-ray machine. And obviously those jobs are not interchangeable. The last element of a bureaucracy that makes a bureaucracy is hierarchical authority. This means that there is a very clear sort of chain of command. There's sort of the person whose job it is to sort of do a very basic task. There's the person whose job it is to supervise that task. And then there's the person whose job it is to supervise all of the different people who are working on a particular site. And then there's the person whose job it is to supervise all of these different sites. That's hierarchical authority. What that means for all of us who are interacting with bureaucracy on a daily basis is that if we want to, say, appeal a decision, we can't appeal the decision with the person who's made the decision. We have to talk to their supervisor, who may have to talk to another supervisor. That leads to a whole lot of sort of tedium and difficulty in dealing with the bureaucracy. It's important to realize that all of these things exist in no small part because these things are what makes a bureaucracy efficient. The formalized rules help standardize practice so that everybody knows what's supposed to be done. So that when I'm standing in line for the airport screening, for example, go back to that example, and I have a bottle of hairspray with me, it's very easy for the first transportation security person I encounter to take one look at that bottle of hairspray and know whether or not it's safe or unsafe. These formalized rules do that. That makes it efficient. This person doesn't have to sit there and look at every single bottle of hairspray and try to decide whether or not it should be acceptable or shouldn't. This person has a very clear set of rules that say these are the things that are acceptable, these are not. The job specialization also makes a bureaucracy very efficient because it means that the people who are doing each individual task have received the training that they need for that task and have gotten a certain level of expertise to do that specific task. The hierarchical authority also makes a bureaucracy very efficient because it means that there's, again, a very clear person who's set to resolve questions or issues, and you know who is giving orders at any given time. You can imagine sort of the chaos and confusion that would ensue if, 10 Transportation Security Agency people were to arrive in an airport every morning. No one had any clue what to do. There would be a 5-minute conversation about who should be at the X-ray and who should be checking the IDs. There would be another sort of question about, if someone had seen something suspicious, well, who do we ask? How do we know? Who gets to weigh in on these decisions? So the three elements of a bureaucracy, the formalized rules, the job specialization, the hierarchical authority, do make it more efficient, but they make it a lot more chaotic as well. Bureaucracy is a very large part of what the government is, and the bureaucracy is divided into different types of organizations. The types of bureaucracies we think of most often are the bureaucracies that are associated with the various cabinet departments. These are the enforcement agencies that basically enforce or interpret all the laws. So that, for example, we have a Secretary of Labor in the cabinet. That Secretary of Labor oversees the Labor Department, and the Labor Department is charged with enforcing all the laws regarding things like fair labor standards, how long you're allowed to work, when you're allowed to have breaks, what the minimum wage is, those types of things. Similarly, we have a Secretary of the Treasury whose job is, and under the Secretary of the Treasury is the Department of the Treasury that is charged with collecting the taxes, determining what portion of one's income should be taxed, and so on. Cabinet departments are one set of organizations that are part of the bureaucracy. There are also independent agencies that are under federal government control, and the best example of this is probably NASA, the National Aeronautics and Space Administration. Because these agencies have a very narrow specialization and are not really charged with enforcing laws that have any hold over the general public, they're not in the cabinet, but they do have a bureaucracy that's attached with them because they do get federal money. In addition to that, you get regulatory agencies. The SEC, the Security and Exchange Commission, is the best example of that. Regulatory agencies oversee a specific part of the economic life of the people. So the SEC is charged with, for example, making sure that stock exchanges operate legally and within certain bounds, and that people aren't illegally sort of taking out excessive loans and so on to pay for stock purchases. That is a very specific part of a larger economic life. It's not really a government service that's provided. It's the government allowing the stock exchange to run freely and without its own interference, but still making sure that certain laws are enforced when it comes to that. Beyond that, there are government corporations like the post office or other agencies that do a specific business and charge for the services that they provide. Last but not least, the final element of a bureaucracy is or type of bureaucracy is a presidential commission. The best example I can come up with that is the Presidential Commission for Physical Fitness, which is a very temporary presidential executive body which has a very specific purpose, in this case to sort of promote physical fitness among children. So these are the 5 different types of organizations that make up the bureaucracy: cabinet departments, independent agencies, regulatory agencies, government corporations, and presidential commissions. Within these organizations, there are different types of employees. There are, at the heads of most of these, presidential appointees who head things like the Department of Labor and the Department and NASA. Presidential appointments are, as the name implies, people who are appointed by the president. And they are generally these appointments generally come at the heads of various organizations. So the Secretary of Labor. Within the Labor Department, actually, there's also a wage and hour department that is a presidential appointee, the head of NASA. And the president gets to appoint these people for a couple of reasons. First, because the president likes to appoint people based on their expertise. But more significantly, the president appoints the heads of these various departments because they will set the standard and the tone for what gets enforced and how things get enforced. The best example of this in recent history may be, some of you may have caught on the news recently, an executive order that the president made that basically sort of told the Immigration and Nationalization Service, or that's what it's called now, it's Customs Control and Immigration, that they did not, well, I believe the correct way to phrase it is that when looking for illegal immigrants, they should sort of not look for them among the sort of 30-year-old high school population that's high school graduates. They could apply for a waiver from within that to sort of not be allowed to stay temporarily with and get a work permit for that. That is the decision to enforce a particular law a particular way that comes out of the Department of Labor and Customs Enforcement. It's also a very important decision because it's something that the president decided, but the president needs the bureaucracy to go along with. Having appointed people who side with the president on this issue, the president can count on them to enforce this particular matter the way he would see fit. The challenge with presidential appointments is that they should be, all presidential appointments have to be confirmed by the Senate, and sometimes, which adds to the time it takes for these these agencies to come online after every presidential election. But it's also important to realize that the presidential appointments are a very minuscule percentage of the number of people who are employed by the bureaucracy. Most of the bureaucracy employs what are called civil servants. And civil servants are people whose career is actually to work in these various agencies. So they're not politicians, they're not political appointments. Their job, they basically make a life decision that they will spend their career working for a particular branch of the government. The civil service exists for a couple of reasons. One is that there are far more jobs within the federal government than the president has time or knows people to appoint to them. But more significantly, the civil service is seen as being more professional. And that's not just because they're permanent. It's also because in many cases they've been trained. They have been hired for their credentials. And because the civil service has a regularized means of hiring and promoting. If you went to work for, say, the Department of Labor or the Department of Agriculture, there are standards that apply, and you will apply for a job, and we can go back to sort of what makes a bureaucracy a bureaucracy. There are formalized rules about what type of person gets hired for which positions. There is job specialization, which says that if you're going to be hired for a particular position, you need to have these minimum qualifications. And there's hierarchical authority, meaning that in order to be hired for this, certain other supervisory people need to approve that. What it means and the way the federal bureaucracy works is that the level of sort of precision and rulemaking goes down to the minutest details. Every federal employee in the civil service is ranked, and they receive what's known as a G rating. And that's the grade of your appointment. So G1, which is the lowest, might not even require a high school diploma. But by the time you get into a G rating that gets into the teens and 20s, these are jobs that are going to require a minimum of a college diploma with within the field of specialization and may require certain years of experience or so on. All the G1s will get the same salary. All the G5s will get the same sort of band of salary within, and it will be higher than the G1s. So that there's sort of a very set, so that everybody can be sort of graded, and those grades determine what level of experience you have, what level of knowledge you have, what level of pay you get. The fact, however, that there are two different types of people who are working for the civil service leads to a certain amount of tension. And what you get is a tension between the political appointees and the civil service. Why? Well, for starters, the people who are in the civil service have been hired for their credentials. And so by and large, they will feel, and rightly so, that they know the situation and they know the job better than someone who's a political appointee who may never have dealt with this issue before in his or her life. Moreover, the bureaucracy gets to decide how things are done. So if, for example, Congress passes a law that says something like, let's pick tax policy, we will cut the taxes of all people making more than this amount of money, it is up to the bureaucracy to decide what that means. And for most of us, it sort of says, well, it's very simple. You take a look at someone's annual income, and if it exceeds a certain level, well, clearly that qualifies for the reduced tax rate. But remember that bureaucracies include formalized rules. So they're going to think about things like, well, okay, if a person's income is higher than this level, but they have children, does that mean that should they be able to sort of deduct the deductions for having children before that or after that? If someone has a higher level of income, but it's all because of interests and stock dividends and stuff like that, it's not earned income, should that count the same or should that count differently? These policies are developed by the bureaucracy. And so they understand and they sort of the nuances of this policy, whereas a political appointee who just arrives on the scene with a new president may not understand that. Moreover, the people who work in the bureaucracy meet the products of their policies. And what I mean by that is you can imagine, for example, someone who's an IRS auditor. That person will get to meet in the course of a day or a week countless people who have dealt with the IRS. And so that person will have a sense of what the strengths and weaknesses of the program are in a way that a political appointee who never has to go and meet anyone will not. The civil service also has a level of expertise. They were hired for this expertise. And if you want to understand how that works, well, think briefly about NASA. Imagine a political appointee running NASA. You really and truly need to have someone who has scientific training and understands space and physics to sort of run NASA. These are all sort of elements that lead to what's known as an agency point of view. An agency point of view is that point of view of any given section of the bureaucracy that comes from having met the policies, having met the people affected by the policies, having studied about this particular policy area. The agency then gets a sense of how it could most effectively do what it is charged to do. And that sense may differ greatly from the sense that the president has. This becomes important because when and if there is a clash between the president and the agency, the people who work for that agency, whatever it is, may from time to time basically just sort of do the math and figure out that there are far more of them than perhaps there were people who spoke up one way or another on this policy on the campaign trail. Moreover, the civil service is very hard to fire, whereas a political appointee will last only as long as the president stays in office, and often even less time than that. So a Bureaucratic agency will often develop this opinion that, well, presidents will come and go, but they will outlast any president, and thus they will do pretty much what they believe they want. This is not always true, hence the clashes between political appointees and the bureaucracy. The final challenge with dealing with the bureaucracy is the question of accountability. You may recall that technically it is the Congress that is supposed to supervise the bureaucracy. But the challenge is that the bureaucracy is so large that it's very difficult to sort of follow the minute details of what happens. Think of it this way. Imagine you are making 100 cupcakes and you accidentally drop an earring into one of them. It will take you a very long time to sort out which particular cupcake contains the earring. The same is sort of true of congressmen supervising the bureaucracy. Congress may get a complaint that one particular office or one particular person is inefficient or rude or doesn't know the laws or something like that. It will take a very long time for a congressman to sort out which person in the bureaucracy is being complained about, and whether or not it's a problem of training, a problem of nobody cares, or a problem of just one person didn't know what was going on. The bureaucracy usually tends to protect their own, and so would prefer to sort of chastise out of the eyes of the government. But this is also very difficult and not easy to sort of resolve. Bureaucracy does not appear to be going anywhere. In fact, the sort of edges of the bureaucracy are sort of very available to everybody. But it's very hard to sort of figure out where a particular problem lies or how to get a good handle on it, how to control what gets done or what doesn't get done. That, in a nutshell, is the bureaucracy. As I said, it's very hard to think about a way in which you interact with government that doesn't contain the bureaucracy. So it winds up being very important, but it winds up also being almost completely unelected and unaccountable. We can talk about whether or not that's a challenge for democracy as well. The fact that the person who is deciding whether or not someone has violated the law cannot be held, is not up for trial or re-election or anything like that. But you can also look at the flip side. Can we reasonably expect to elect every single person, or do we need to be able to sort of just set some standards and hope that those standards will hire the right people?